My name is Kale Morrow. I was, for 11 months, 4 days, and approximately 6 hours, the personal bodyguard of Her Imperial Radiance, sovereign of the Velhari Conclave, daughter of the Crimson Veil, Empress Zyra Vel Seen. And then she fired me. She did it in front of her entire court. 43 advisors, 11 generals, 9 diplomatic guests from 3 different star systems, and 1 very uncomfortable protocol droid who I think felt genuinely sorry for me. She stood from her throne, all 6 feet of her, violet skin luminous under the palace's bioluminescent ceiling, silver hair braided back in the traditional empress pattern, those amber eyes that had never once looked at me like I was a person. And she said 4 words that changed my life. Remove the human bodyguard. No preamble, no explanation, no thank you for the 11 months I had spent sleeping outside her chamber door, tasting her food before she ate, intercepting 2 assassination attempts, 1 kidnapping scheme, and a very determined journalist with a very illegal neural tap device. Just remove the human bodyguard. Her head of palace guard, a mountain of gray-scaled muscle named Commander Dravik, looked almost apologetic when he handed me my severance envelope. Almost. He was Velhari. They didn't do apologetic particularly well. His expression hovered somewhere between regret and you knew this was coming. I hadn't actually. I walked out of the Conclave's capital palace with my single kit bag, my personal sidearm, which they let me keep, to their credit, and the severance, 1,000 galactic credits and a transit chit to anywhere in the Velhari network. The thing about the Velhari Conclave is that it sits at the intersection of 4 major trade lanes. The Empress's seat, Vel Prime, is one of the most politically active planets in the known galaxy, which is a polite way of saying it is full of people who want the Empress dead, and very few of those people take a day off. I booked the cheapest bunk on the cheapest shuttle to the transit hub at Vel Station 12, found a quiet corner of the station's lower market, and bought myself a coffee, the humankind, imported at considerable expense, which said a lot about how desperate I was for something familiar, and I sat down to think. I hadn't been given a reason. That bothered me more than the firing itself. I'd had a clean record, 11 months, 0 incidents on my watch. I'd taken a pulse burn to the left shoulder protecting her from a hired gunman during the Conclave's annual address. I had a scar to prove it. I'd spent 3 weeks sleeping in the palace kitchen because the regular staff rotation had a security gap I didn't like. I had flagged 17 potential threats that her Velhari guard had dismissed as within acceptable parameters. 7 of those 17 had turned out to be real. She'd never acknowledged any of it, not once. That was fine. I hadn't signed on for gratitude. Bodyguard work isn't about gratitude, it's about making sure the client is breathing at the end of every day. And she had been, for 11 months, breathing just fine. I was halfway through my coffee when my comm unit buzzed. Unmarked source, encrypted, the kind of encryption that costs money. I almost didn't open it. Then I thought about the 17 threats and the way Commander Dravik had looked at me when he handed over the severance envelope, and I opened it. 3 words in plain text. Don't go far. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I ordered a second coffee, pulled my kit bag closer to my feet, and watched the crowd. Part 2, what the court didn't know. I'm going to explain something about the Velhari Conclave, because if you're going to understand what happened next, you need to understand what I was dealing with. The Velhari are old. Not old like, we've had civilization for a few centuries, old like. We watched 3 other species rise and fall before we bothered to develop faster-than-light travel, old. They have a rigid, intricate social structure that makes human bureaucracy look like a child's drawing. There are 37 distinct castes. There are rules about who can look at whom at what angle during a meal. There are asterisk songs for specific diplomatic situations, and you are expected to know which verse applies to your situation at any given moment. Humans in the Velhari system occupy a strange liminal space. We're too primitive to be respected, too persistent to be ignored, and too unpredictable to be placed into a comfortable category. Most Velhari find us mildly baffling. The court finds us useful. We'll do jobs the caste system won't allow Velhari to do, and quietly contemptuous. Empress Zyra Vel-Seen had hired me 18 months ago, not because she wanted a human bodyguard, but because the conclave's internal security had become structurally compromised. Someone she didn't tell me who, and I didn't ask, had been buying loyalties inside her palace guard. Every Velhari guard was a potential risk. A human, with no existing political allegiances within the conclave structure, was a clean slate. She'd made that clear in our first, and until the day she fired me, only real conversation. "You have no loyalty to the court," she had said, looking at me the way you look at a tool you're considering purchasing. "No family ties to any of the houses, no political debt, no fear of my court's social consequences." "No, Your Radiance," I had agreed. "You will protect my person. You will report directly to me through an encrypted private channel. You will not take orders from Commander Dravik or any palace official. You will treat any attempted instruction from court personnel as potentially compromised." "Understood." "You will not speak unless spoken to in public contexts." A pause. "You are, in some respects, more trustworthy for being outside my world entirely." She hadn't meant it as a compliment, but it was, in its way, a very precise assessment. For 11 months, I had done exactly what she asked. I'd been the silent human in the corner, the one no one looked at, the one no one considered. Guards get overlooked when they don't look like threats, and a human in Velhari court looked about as threatening as a chair. Which is exactly why I'd been able to spot all 17 of those threats before they got close. The encrypted message on my comm unit hadn't come from Commander Dravik. It hadn't come from any palace channel I recognized. It had come from a frequency I'd set up myself 11 months ago and shared with exactly one person. Zyra Vel-Seen. The Empress had sent me a message 3 hours after firing me in public. "Don't go far." I finished my coffee, checked my sidearm, and started watching the crowd in earnest. Part 3, The First Hunter. They sent the first one 14 hours after I left the palace. He was Keth, a species I'd encountered twice before, once on a border station contract, and once in a briefing file that had made for very uncomfortable reading. The Keth are tall, insectoid in their body structure, with 4 upper limbs and a coloration that makes them excellent at blending into urban environments. They're professional killers, have been for 600 years. The best assassin guild in the quadrant is Keth-operated. This one was dressed like a transit worker, which was clever. He moved through the lower market like he belonged there, and he did belong there, except that he kept checking a small scanning device in his left lower hand, and the device was pointed consistently at *me. I was being hunted. The key thing about being hunted is that you almost never want to run. Running is a confirmation. Running means you've seen them, and once an assassin knows you've made them, the playbook changes from quiet elimination to forced acceleration, which rarely goes well for the target. I bought a third coffee, moved to a different stall, kept him in my peripheral vision. He was good, but he was calibrating, scanning the area for backup, probably, or waiting for confirmation from whoever had hired him that I was still the right target. That gave me a window. Here's the other thing about being an ex-bodyguard with 11 months of Velhari court experience. I know how assassins think, because I spent 11 months thinking about how assassins would approach my client. I'd essentially been running an ongoing threat analysis loop in my head every day for nearly a year. The Keth hunters approach patterns. his scanning intervals, his sightline choices, all of it slotted into frameworks I'd been building since day one. I picked up my kit bag, walked to the nearest transit counter, and booked a pod to Vel Station 12's upper tier, the commercial sector, more crowded, more exits, better sightlines. I moved at a pace that was brisk but not panicked, purposeful, like a man with somewhere to be. He followed. In the transit pod, I sent a message back to the encrypted channel. Someone's already hunting. Keth, professional, hired, who wants me dead. The response came 40 seconds later. Not you. I stared at that for a moment. Who? Me? They are hunting me through you. You were my last active external contact. They think removing you removes my eyes outside the palace. I thought about that for exactly 3 seconds. Are you secure? For now, the court does not know I sent you the message. They believe I fired you. I need that to remain true. Why did you fire me publicly? A longer pause, longer than felt comfortable. Because someone inside my court told the guild I had a human operative. If you stayed, they would have killed you inside the palace. I removed you first to give you a chance to run. You were protecting me. I was protecting an asset. I almost smiled at that, almost. The Keth Hunter is going to reach the upper tier in 4 minutes. Handle it, then we need to talk, not through comms. Part 4, the conversation. I won't walk you through the entire business with the Keth Hunter, partly because it wasn't particularly elegant, and partly because the less detail I put in writing about operational methods, the better. What I will say is that by the time I reached the upper tier's commercial sector, I had a clear understanding of where he was, where his angles were, and what he'd do when I entered the crowded atrium. I let him think he had me. Keth assassins favor a specific approach in crowded spaces. They get close, use a narrow-profile weapon that won't register on most standard scanners, and rely on the confusion of a public space to cover the first few seconds after. It's effective against most targets. Against someone who's been spending 11 months profiling exactly this attack vector, not so much. He didn't complete his approach. I won't say more than that. He was alive when station security found him. I'm a bodyguard, not a killer. But he was going to be explaining himself to the station's legal processing unit for quite a while. I left the station on a cargo tender headed for Vel Prime's outer ring. Not the palace, the outer ring, where the city gets old and dense, and the architecture goes back 400 years, and nobody looks too hard at anyone else's business. The message came 2 hours later, this time with coordinates. The meeting place was a tea house in Vel Prime's old quarter, the kind of place that had been serving the same 3 blends for 2 centuries, and didn't particularly care who you were as long as you paid in advance and didn't make noise. It was, in other words, the last place anyone would expect to find the Empress of the Velhari Conclave. She was already there when I arrived. No court robes, no crown, no silver-braided formal wear. She was dressed in a gray travel coat, hood up, sitting in a back corner with a cup of something that steamed dark red. Her violet skin was unmistakable up close, but from a distance in the low light of the tea house, she could have been any number of near-human species. She looked different without the throne. I don't mean smaller, she'd never looked small. I mean she looked like a person rather than an institution. I sat down across from her. She didn't look up immediately, just kept looking at the cup. You handled the Keth operative, she said. He's alive. I know. Station security is confused about his employment records. A pause. You're angry. I'm professionally neutral, I said. Anger is a distraction. She looked up then. Those amber eyes, I'd spent 11 months not making direct eye contact with them, because in Velhari culture sustained eye contact from a subordinate is a significant social transgression. Now, in a tea house with no court watching, She held my gaze like she was measuring something. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't owe me anything. I was an asset." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more complicated. "That is what I said, yes. I am beginning to think I said it incorrectly." I waited. "The guild is called the Sable Reach," she said. "They are the oldest assassination network in the quadrant. They were hired 7 months ago by a coalition of 3 conclave houses who want the succession resolved in favor of their preferred candidate, my cousin, Velderath, who is significantly more willing to sign trade agreements that benefit those 3 houses at the expense of the conclave's outer settlements." 7 months ago, I repeated. "You knew about this for 7 months." "I had suspicions. I had no proof. The Sable Reach is careful." She wrapped both hands around her cup. 3 weeks ago I found the proof. A financial trail traced through 6 intermediary accounts ending at House Velcora's. The problem is that the proof exists on a data chip, and that data chip is currently in the hands of a courier I sent to the Conclave's Neutral Arbitration Council on Yemra Station. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "The courier hasn't arrived," I said. "The courier hasn't arrived, and Yemra Station is 14 days' travel from Vel Prime, and the Sable Reach now knows I sent him, which means they will intercept the chip before it reaches the council." She met my eyes again. "I need someone to reach Yemra Station before the Sable Reach does. Someone they are not currently tracking. Someone who is not officially employed by my court and therefore has no visible connection to me." "Someone you publicly fired," I said. "Yes." I sat back. Outside the tea house, Vel Prime's old quarter hummed with the usual traffic, vendors, tourists, the occasional cargo drone threading between the narrow streets. "You had a plan," I said. "From the beginning. When you found the proof, you started the exit sequence for me. You fired me publicly to cut my visible connection to you. You sent me the message to keep me local. You're running a covert operation from inside your own palace." "I am the Empress of the Velhari Conclave," she said. It wasn't arrogance. It was almost tired. "I have been running covert operations since I was 19 years old. It is what the job requires." I thought about the 11 months, the 17 threats. The way she'd never acknowledged any of it, never deviated from the asset framing, never let anything slip that might suggest she saw me as anything but a functional tool. "The courier," I said, "where is he now?" "Last confirmed position, Vel Station 40, 4 days out from Yemris. He went dark 36 hours ago." "The Sable Reach already has people on the route." "Yes." "And you want me to go in, find the courier, recover the chip, and get it to the Arbitration Council?" "Yes." "Alone?" "I cannot involve palace assets without risking exposure of the operation. Every official channel is potentially compromised. You are—" She stopped, looked at her cup again. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted just slightly. "You are the only one I trust to do this." The tea house was very quiet. I'd spent 11 months being an asset, a tool, the silent human in the corner that no one looked at. And she had, apparently, spent 11 months watching. "I'll need a ship," I said. "Something fast, something unregistered. Credits for fuel and docking fees. A description of the courier and his emergency contact protocols, and the location of every known Sable Reach operative in the region." "I have all of that," she said. She slid a data card across the table. "I prepared this 4 days ago. When you were still deciding whether to fire me. When I was deciding how to do it in a way that kept you alive long enough to be useful. A pause, and otherwise." I picked up the data card. "I have one condition," I said. She raised her eyes. The amber was very clear in the tea house light. "What condition?" "When this is over, when the chip reaches the council and your court is cleaned out, you tell me the truth. Not asset. The actual reason you set this up the way you did." She looked at me for a long moment. Agreed, she said. Part 5, The Reach of Sable. The ship she'd arranged was a Vel-class courier, small, fast, technically registered to a mineral survey company that didn't exist. It smelled like machine oil and old coffee grounds, which under the circumstances I found deeply comforting. I made it to Vel Station 40 in 3 days, running the engines harder than the maintenance log suggested was advisable. The data chip had everything I needed. The courier's name, Sel Morin, Velhari male, mid-caste diplomatic runner, his emergency signal frequency, a list of 7 Sable Reach operatives confirmed active in the shipping lanes between Vel Prime and Yemris, and a note in the Empress's own handwriting, actual handwriting, not printed, that read, "The chip is more important than anything. If you must choose, choose the chip. Don't be a hero." I appreciated the honesty. Vel Station 40 was a mid-route waypoint, fuel, supplies, crew rotation. Not glamorous. The kind of station that has 3 bars, 1 mediocre food hall, and a constant smell of recycled atmosphere that no filtration system ever fully eliminates. I'd worked stations like this on 3 previous contracts. I knew how they moved, how the foot traffic worked, where someone would hide if they were running scared. I found Sel Morin in the maintenance sublevel, hiding behind a coolant recycler, which was, objectively, a reasonable choice. The sublevel had 6 exits, poor scanner coverage, and constant ambient noise that made long-range listening devices mostly useless. He was young, barely into adulthood by Velhari standards, which put him somewhere in his late 70s in human equivalent terms, though he looked no older than 30 by human eyes. He had the lean, angular features of the mid-caste administrative families, and he was holding a courier case to his chest like his life depended on it. Which, to be fair, it did. "Sel Morin," I said quietly from the shadow of a ventilation stack. "I'm Kale Morrow. The Empress sent me." He had a small plasma cutter in his hand before I finished the sentence. Decent reflexes for a diplomat's runner. "Verification code," he said. I gave him the phrase from the data card. He exhaled. "They've been tracking the station since I arrived," he said. "2 of them, I think. They've been watching the docking bays." "I didn't come through the docking bays," I said. "I'd come in on an automated supply tender, which was considerably less comfortable but considerably less monitored. How long ago did you go dark?" 32 hours. My handler stopped responding. I assumed they were compromised. "Your handler is fine." The Empress pulled everyone off official channels to reduce exposure. I looked at the case. "Is the chip intact?" "Yes," he hesitated. "There are 2 of them in the station. Sable Reach, I've heard of them, they don't miss." "Then we won't give them a clear shot," I said. "We're leaving in the next 20 minutes. Can you move?" "I've been hiding behind a coolant recycler for 32 hours. I can move." We almost made it clean. Almost. The 2 Sable Reach operatives had been smart about the docking bays, but they'd also hedged their bets on the service corridors, the route between the maintenance sublevel and the tender dock. They had 1 watcher on a maintenance access gantry, positioned to cover a 60-degree corridor approach. I saw him because I'd been looking at exactly that position since I entered the sublevel, the same way I'd spent 11 months looking at every door in the Empress's vicinity. You build a habit of asking, if I were going to do harm here, where would I stand? "Stop," I said quietly. Sel Morin stopped. I pointed up. He followed my gesture. The watcher on the gantry was motionless, which was the tell a maintenance worker moves. A watcher trying to look like maintenance doesn't. "Other route," Sel Morin breathed. "There is no other route that gets us to the tender dock in time." I thought for 3 seconds. "Stay here. When you hear the maintenance alert alarm, walk quickly to the dock. Don't run." Running draws eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Trigger the maintenance alarm," I said. I won't go into detail about how I did that either. Suffice to say that the station's maintenance alert system was designed to respond to anomalous pressure readings in coolant lines, and the gantry above us had a coolant junction that responded very predictably to a particular kind of interference. When the alarm went off, the watcher moved toward it because a maintenance worker would, and holding cover means maintaining the performance. And in the 30-second window that created, Sel Morin walked to the dock at a brisk, professional pace, and I followed. The second Sable Reach operative was at the dock. That was a problem. She was Velhari, which surprised me slightly. The Sable Reach operates across species, but in my experience they recruited more heavily from non-Velhari, since it's easier to pass unnoticed if you don't share the client's species. She was positioned near the tender, holding a scanning device, wearing dockworker overalls. She saw Sel Morin before she saw me. She raised the scanner, which would identify him by biometric. I stepped in front of the scan. "Excuse me," I said in my most aggressively bland tourist voice. "Is this the tender to the outer ring? I think I have the wrong dock." She blinked at me. Humans are not generally what professional killers expect to find in their operational path. I am average height, average build, and I had spent 11 months cultivating an expression of mild, unthreatening bafflement that I deployed now with considerable commitment. "This is a service dock," she said. "Oh, I'm so sorry. The signage in this station is really confusing. Is there another?" Sel Morin was on the tender. I could see him from my peripheral vision. The Sable Reach operative's scan finished. It had read me human, no biometric match to Sel Morin, and she was recalibrating. 3 seconds to realize she'd been played. I used 2 of them to get to the tender myself. The 3rd second she used to raise a weapon, but by then the tender's dock seal had engaged, and 3 centimeters of reinforced transit hull doesn't care about handguns. We were off the station in 90 seconds. Part 6, 14 days. 14 days from Vel Station 40 to Yemra Station. The tender was not built for passengers. It had crew bunks, a functional galley, and a communications system I spent the first 2 days significantly improving. Sel Morin turned out to be better company than I expected. He'd been in diplomatic service for 30 years, had opinions on everything from trade policy to the station's terrible food, and knew considerably more about the Sable Reach than I did. "They've been operating for over 4 centuries, he told me on the 3rd day. Originally, they were a mercenary unit enforcement for one of the old mining cartels. Gradually, they transitioned. There's a council of 7 who run operations. The mid-tier guilds are afraid of them because the Reach doesn't compete. They have a standing policy that anyone operating in their contracted territory is subject to elimination." "How many operatives?" "No one knows exactly. Estimates range from 300 to 1,200 active agents across the quadrant." He paused. "The Empress's proof, if it reaches the Arbitration Council, it won't just implicate the 3 houses. It will expose the Reach's payment structure. Financial records going back 6 years. The Council would have grounds to authorize a full interdiction of their operations." I thought about that. "So they're not just trying to protect the client houses," I said. "They're trying to protect themselves. The chip ends the Sable Reach if it gets to the Council intact," Sel Morin confirmed, "which is why they sent more than 2 operatives. On the 5th day, we picked up a tail. A fast courier, running dark, paralleling our course at the edge of scanner range. Too consistent to be coincidental. The Sable Reach had assets in the shipping lane. I ran the engines harder. The tender wasn't built for hard running either, but it was more resilient than the maintenance logs suggested, which seemed to be a consistent theme in the Empress's equipment choices. On the 7th day, the tail acquired company, 2 more vessels, running a loose triangle formation that I recognized from the threat pattern files I'd studied back when I was profiling approaches to the Empress. A containment triangle. They were trying to slow us down and box us in. I sent a message on the private channel, not because I expected a response. The encryption added significant latency at this distance, but because it felt important to keep the line open. 12 days out, 3 ships on our tail. The Reach has more assets than your list suggested. Her response came 8 hours later. I know, I have been monitoring. There is a way station at Navigation Beacon 7 Veth. It is Conclave registered, but the crew owes me a significant personal favor. They will not ask questions. Can you maintain distance for 2 more days? I looked at the fuel readouts. Yes. Good, I have sent something. Part 7, the WAYSTATION. The way station at 7 Veth was a small thing, a refueling platform and crew rotation point that barely warranted the designation station. The crew was 4 Velhari, and a Sulphine engineer who had the permanently startled expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by the galaxy's behavior, but hadn't quite adjusted his face to reflect this. They were ready for us, fuel fast, no questions. What the Empress had sent was a ship. Not the tender, a proper ship. Fast-class courier, conclave military surplus, the kind of vessel that was built for exactly the situation we were in, getting somewhere quickly while people tried to stop you. It was docked on the way station's secondary port, and it was already fueled, and in the maintenance bay was a case with a note attached. The note said, "You said you needed the truth. This is part of it. Z." Inside the case was a full Sable Reach operational file. Not a summary, a complete file with agent identities, station contacts, communication protocols, and the locations of their 3 closest assets to our current position. She hadn't just been watching the shipping lanes. She'd been running a counterintelligence operation against the Sable Reach for months. The financial records on the chip were the final piece, but she'd been building the case long before she had them. And she'd been doing it, in significant part, by feeding information through me without me knowing. The 17 threats I'd flagged, the positions I'd taken, the security gaps I'd identified. She'd been using my analysis of her quartz vulnerabilities to map the Sable Reach's insertion points. I was, apparently, considerably more useful as an intelligence asset than I had known. I should have been annoyed. Technically, I should have been annoyed. I wasn't entirely. Selmoran looked at the ship. Is that? Get in, I said. Part 8, YMRAS. We reached Yemra Station, with 9 days to spare on the Arbitration Council's submission window. The 3 Sable Reach ships that had been tailing us were, as of our departure from 7 Veth, experiencing navigational difficulties of a kind that suggested someone had remotely interfaced with their course correction systems. I didn't ask how. The Empress's note had strongly implied I shouldn't. Yemra Station is the largest neutral arbitration platform in the quadrant, a place built specifically for disputes too significant for any single system's legal framework. It's vast, heavily monitored, politically sacrosanct. The Sable Reach could operate almost anywhere in the quadrant, but Yemra's had a defensive infrastructure that made direct action inside the station genuinely difficult. The key word being inside. We went inside. Selmoran walked the chip to the Arbitration Council's receiving desk himself, which felt right. He'd carried it this far, and the formal submission required the original courier. I stood at his shoulder, which was technically beyond my brief but felt non-negotiable. The Council's receiving officer, a Sulphine female with the particular air of someone who processed galactic-scale crises before breakfast, scanned the chip, confirmed its integrity, looked at both of us and said, "The Council will begin its review within 48 hours. You are to remain available for verification testimony." "Understood," Selmoran said. The receiving officer looked at me. "And you are?" "His escort," I said. She made a note and moved on. 48 hours. I sent a message on the private channel. Chip delivered. Counsel received. We're on standby for verification. 3 minutes, the fastest response yet. I know, I have been watching Yemris's arrival logs. A pause I could tell because the timestamp on the next line was 6 seconds later. Thank you, Kale. It was the first time she'd used my name. Part 9, the truth. She came herself, which I had not expected. On the second day of the verification standby, a fast conclave courier docked at Yemris's diplomatic terminal, and Empress Zyra Vel-Seen walked off it with 2 Velhari guards I didn't recognize, new assignments, clearly vetted through a process I trusted more than the old one, and a composure that looked entirely normal unless you knew what to look for. What to look for? The slight tension across her shoulders, the way she scanned the room in a half-second sweep before settling her expression into imperious neutrality. The tell of someone who has been operating at sustained high threat level and hasn't fully let it down yet. I knew what to look for. She found me in the station's neutral corridor, outside the arbitration wing. She sent the 2 guards to either end of the corridor, which gave us 20 meters of semi-privacy. She stood in front of me, in travel robes rather than court dress, and she looked at me for a moment that stretched past comfortable. You said you had a condition, she said. I did. The chip is with the council. The 3 houses are under investigation. The Sable Reach's operational network is being dismantled by a joint conclave arbitration task force as of this morning. She held my gaze. I am here to fulfill your condition. I waited. When I was 19, she said, I was assigned my first bodyguard, a Velhari senior guard from House Vel Amara, caste appropriate, formally trained. He was excellent at his job. He was also my cousin's informant, and I did not know it for 3 years. She looked away briefly at the neutral gray of the corridor wall. I have not trusted a member of my own court's security structure since then. I work with them. I rely on them for standard functions. But I do not trust them with anything that matters. And then you hired a human, I said. I hired a human who had no reason to owe anyone in my court anything, who was baffled by our social structure and therefore not subject to its pressures, who was, as I told you at the start, more trustworthy for being outside my world entirely. She paused. That was accurate. What I did not tell you was the rest. The corridor was very quiet. For 11 months, she said, I watched you flag 17 threats, most of which my court had dismissed. I watched you take a weapons discharge meant for me without flinching and not mention it again for 3 days, as if it was simply part of the work. I watched you sleep outside my chamber door on 4 separate occasions when you judged the internal rotation insufficient without being asked. I watched you. She stopped. A Velhari empress did not have to stop mid-sentence. That was the tell I had been waiting for. I watched you treat the work like it mattered, not as a contract, not as a fee, like it mattered. She met my eyes. In 11 months, you became the person I trusted most in my entire world, she said. And when the Sable Reach threat required me to remove you from the palace, the thing I found myself most reluctant to do was send you away from my vicinity, which was an operationally inconvenient feeling. Operationally inconvenient, I said. Don't make me say it more plainly than I already am, she said. I am not built for plain. It has taken me 11 months to work up to this much plain. I looked at her, at this woman who had built a counterintelligence operation against a 4-century-old assassination network while running a planetary empire, who had protected me by firing me, who had sent me a ship and a file and signed the note *Z, who had just now told me the truth. You trusted me, I said. Yes. Even when it was inconvenient. Especially then. I leaned against the corridor wall. She remained standing, because Velhari empresses do not lean, but the tension in her shoulders had shifted into something different. I'll need different terms, I said. She blinked, first time I'd ever made her blink, different. For the continued arrangement, I'm not going back to Asset, I held her gaze. And I'm not sleeping outside the door. The corner of her mouth moved again, closer to a smile this time, considerably closer. The terms, she said, are negotiable. Also, I said, I want to know how you managed the remote interface with the Sable Reach ship's navigational systems, because that is technically impressive, and I'd like to understand the mechanism. I will explain it, she said, over a meal that does not come from a transit tender's galley. Agreed, I said. Part 10, after. The Arbitration Council's findings were released 6 weeks later. House Velcoras, House Velmayern, and House Veldath, the 3 conspirators were stripped of their council seats and placed under conclave investigation. The investigation into the Sable Reach's operation extended across 4 systems and resulted in the largest coordinated law enforcement action in the quadrant in 30 years. Veldarath, the Empress's cousin and the intended beneficiary of the succession push, turned out to have known nothing about the plot. He'd been a convenient name on a plan he'd never been consulted about. He came to Yemris Station personally to offer testimony to the council, and while I wouldn't say he and the Empress became close, the meeting was, by all accounts, not hostile. Selmorin was promoted. He seemed quietly pleased about this and not at all surprised. Commander Dravik, who had known about the palace security compromise for approximately 2 months before the Empress identified it and had not reported it for reasons he struggled to articulate coherently, retired from palace service. Quietly, with no further complications. The Empress's court underwent a restructuring that took 4 months and involved, at one point, an auditor from 3 different neutral systems, a significant amount of paperwork, and one memorable afternoon in which 17 separate advisors discovered simultaneously that their personnel files had been reviewed by a private intelligence operation that had been running inside the palace for 11 months. I was present for that afternoon. It was, objectively, one of the more satisfying experiences of my professional career. My new terms. Formally, Senior Liaison, External Security, Imperial Conclave. The title is deliberately opaque, which is intentional. Informally, I am still her bodyguard. I am also, increasingly, her external eyes, the person outside the court's social structure, outside its pressures, outside the reach of its obligations, who can look at a situation and see it without the distortion field that centuries of Velhari caste politics creates. I am, apparently, more useful for being outside her world entirely. She told me that once at the beginning, and she was right. She's been right about most things, in my experience, which is either an argument for the quality of her judgment or an argument for how long 11 months of careful observation will take to accumulate. I told her that once. She said, 43 years in my case. I began observing your species when I was 32. And then she looked away, in the manner of someone who has said slightly more than intended, and changed the subject to security protocols for the upcoming trade summit. 43 years. I spent 11 months being the silent human in the corner. She spent 43 years deciding humans might be worth the trouble. I think we're going to be fine. There is one more thing I should tell you. 3 months after Yemris, I was reviewing the new palace security rotation, my rotation now, built from scratch with vetted personnel, and I found, in the original file the Empress had compiled before she fired me, a single additional document I hadn't noticed on the first pass-through. It was a medical record, mine. From the incident with the pulse burn to my shoulder 11 months ago, full report filed by the palace physician under the Empress's private access code. Attached to it was a note in her handwriting, dated the day after the incident. It said he did not mention the injury. He continued his rotation for 3 days before the physician found it during a standard check. Loyalty assessment, complete. Assessment, exceptional. Note for personal reference, he should be told he matters. Find the right time. She'd been looking for the right time. For 11 months. I showed it to her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Then she said, with the most magnificent composure I have ever seen deployed in a moment of genuine vulnerability, "The filing system requires updates. Things end up in unexpected places." "Sure," I said. "The sentiment," she added after a pause that cost her something, "stands." "I know," I said. "Good." She looked back at the security rotation. "Now explain to me why you've scheduled 3 additional checkpoints on the East Wing corridor, when the threat analysis only supports 2. "Because the threat analysis doesn't account for the window access on the outer terrace," I said, "which I flagged 14 months ago." She didn't say anything, but the corner of her mouth moved. I've learned to read that. It means she's pleased. End. Story metadata. Field value. Title: She fired her silent human bodyguard. Then every assassin in the galaxy came hunting. Channel suffix /best HFY love story. Film seed DNA sites 999.9 1998. Elite bodyguard assassin networks. Silent professionals, precision, loyalty. Engine C, misjudgment reversal plus H, the defiant melts. Human narrator type, bodyguard/diplomat's guard. Alien female role, empress, adult. Romantic stream. Setting: Royal Palace, right arrow transit stations, right arrow deep space, right arrow arbitration station. Obstacle: antagonist assassination guild, Sable Reach, plus conspiring courthouses. Mood: action-driven with slow burn romance. Ending: doubter's silence plus she chooses him openly, quiet domestic warmth. Stream: romantic adult. Approximate word count, words. Estimated duration at 160 WPM, minutes.